Yeah, hello. Lovely to meet everyone and looking forward to chatting with each of you as well throughout the day. My name is Hannah. I am a KTP associate at Queen's University and I'm based in Cuneen as well on a 2-year project. I thought I might just begin by talking a little bit more about what a KTP is for anyone that's not familiar. Just out of curiosity, has anybody heard of it before? Yeah, yeah. So essentially, it's a knowledge transfer partnership, and it's really a collaboration between a business, a university, and then associate, which obviously in this case is myself. And I suppose it's a brilliant program. It's really the aim of it is to assist businesses in implementing in an innovative like project or a strategy, or maybe to focus on a particular aspect of the business that they maybe not necessarily had paid attention to before. So it really is an incredible partnership. And the idea is that a business would come up with an idea or a strategy, they would collaborate then with a university, and then together they would employ a graduate to sort of implement that project. So partnerships typically could be between 12 and 13 months. In my case, it's 24. So I just started mine in October, and then it will run to October next year. And my project is very much focused on implementing sustainable strategies within Cuneen, and then also working towards developing a circular management system within the business as well across the key projects. So just to touch then on Cuneen Group as well. So Cuneen specialise in designing, manufacturing and supplying of garments. We also offer a complete uniform management system as well for some of our core contracts. And a range of our customers, I'll go into this in a little bit more detail, but they're primarily from private sector. So the group comprises of 4 companies: Cuneen by Design, Cuneen at Work, Cuneen Protection and Cuneen Defence. It's quite a small business, but it has a global presence. Was founded in 1966 and currently employs about 200 people. The head office is in 5 Mile Town. We also have a design and sales office in Manchester, and then we've country offices as well in France, China, India and Bangladesh. So just to give you a little insight into what the warehouse and the offices look like in 5 Mile Town. So we do everything from the design, the sourcing, the prototyping, the testing as well of the products. So you can see some of the equipment we have for cutting the materials, and then our production floor as well. And then we have our own shooting range where some of the body armour then is tested to the requirements. Then just to talk a little bit more about the various companies then. So I mentioned it's a group business. This is where it can kind of get a little bit complicated, and I always find it quite difficult to explain, so hopefully I'll do this justice. So the first one is Cuneen by Design, and that is the company that specialises in designing and supplying licensed wear for children and adults. We'd sell through some of the main UK retailers: John Lewis, Matland, Next, and then we also have our own brand as well, which is called Brand Threads. Then we have Cuneen at Work, and that's essentially our corporate uniform business, and that's where the managed service comes in as well. So some of the key contracts there that we have at the moment are TfL, NH Ambulance and the MOJ. Then Cuneen Protection is our protective body armour. That would all be manufactured in Cuneen, so that's just really, I suppose, something to really shout out that that's manufactured here in Northern Ireland. And then some of our contracts there are UK MOD, French Police, New Zealand Police. And then we have Cuneen Defence, which specialises in designing and manufacturing the protective combat wear for global military authorities. So again, UK MOD, Dutch military and Singapore Army. So we have a real breadth of customers there. I suppose the common tagline that we tend to use whenever we are explaining this is that it's our primary objective not to mix the boxes up in the warehouse, that we mix the pyjamas with the military wear. We also have a small group of aviation, which is very much developing, but that is something that is happening as well within the business. So I suppose really in terms of the sustainability ambition, I think really like any other business, can recognise the importance of sustainability and obviously the changing and challenging landscape within the industry. And I think the project was really born from that recognition, in that they needed someone to focus solely on sustainability rather than it being something that was split across multiple job roles. And it was, I suppose, in some ways too thinly spread as well. So that's where the project really came from. And from my perspective, I was delighted. I was coming to the end of my master's studies, where I had been studying sustainability with Falmouth University, and I was thinking about, what am I going to do after this? How am I going to implement what I've learned into reality? So the KTP was the perfect opportunity for me. And the KTP fits it quite nicely as well, actually, because I suppose the academic support really enriches the project, because you're almost getting like validation and sort of shared knowledge from people who aren't actually directly linked to the business, but obviously have a much broader scope of research and experience and whatnot to share. So it's a great way to sort of approach it. So yeah, as I said, my project is really about implementing sustainable strategies and working towards developing circular solutions for some of these projects. And just to mention, this is actually my colleague Jamie that sits beside me in the office. He didn't mind me using his photograph today, but I did promise a shout out to him. But one of the perks maybe of the job is trying on some of the equipment, which yeah, never gets old. So just before I start talking about sustainability then, I just wanted to highlight some of the challenges that are within the workwear and design in workwear and defence wear. And I think it's just really important to distinguish the difference between designing for fashion and designing for workwear and defence. So obviously the aesthetic of any product is hugely important, but it's almost, when it comes to workwear and defence wear, there's multiple layers on top of that. And really that's, for the obvious reasons that it's protective wear, it has to be functional, it has to be durable, and it has to be able, the wear has to be able to perform in various different conditions, far beyond what we deal with in a day-to-day basis in some instances as well. So you'll see a list, hopefully you can see that on the screen, but you'll see a list there of various different design requirements. So, in terms of the durability, we need to think very carefully about the tear resistance, the tensile strength. In terms of comfort, it has to be lightweight, moisture management, functionality, maybe has to be camouflage, has to be adaptable, multifunctional. And then in protective, there's an endless list here, especially for Canadian defence, in terms of mosquito repellent, obviously FR treated, UV protected. So there's various different considerations that have to be given whenever you're thinking about workwear and defence. And I suppose the reason why I'm bringing this to your attention is that every single one of these will impact the sustainability of the garment. They're by no means simple garments. They're obviously designed to for various different needs and for various different purposes, but something as simple as the concealment, for example, and you'll see that in some of the garments that I've brought today, there's maybe multiple zips and they're not there as a design feature. They're specifically placed there should it be that they need access into like a hidden pocket, or should it be that various pieces of equipment have to be attached, or multiple reasons, and all of those will influence how sustainable that garment is. So just think that's quite important to highlight. As well as that, the various different coatings or treatments that the fabric might have, FR for example, that will influence the recyclability of that. And often or not, things like that will limit the recyclability of it because it's a contaminant. So it means that when it goes through the recycling process, actually the output isn't as pure as the input, and therefore it's not of the same value. So then just to touch on the sustainability challenges, I'm just going to flip to my notes because this is quite wordy. By no means is this extensive. This is just very much an overview of some of the challenges that I've encountered so far within the job, and it can be quite challenging, and I think some of these as well present themselves as internal challenges, and then some will be external as well. So complex technical and design requirements. I've mentioned it already, but obviously given the nature of the products, the functionality, the quality, the durability, absolutely cannot be compromised. So as a result of that, we rely heavily on a lot of synthetic materials to ensure the optimal performance. But very often these are blended or they're treated. So again, as I mentioned, it can limit the recyclability of it and the reuse of it. And then additionally, on top of that, where we generally try to implement recycled material, very often that's not of the same quality. So it might be much weaker than what the virgin material is. So it's not really as easy to say, okay, here's a garment that's polyester, let's make it recycled polyester. Generally, they're not like for like. So that can present some challenges. And it's hard to sort of always maintain that level of requirement as well within the garments. Then in terms limited infrastructure and fragmented supply chain, so in terms of recycling polyester, nylon, cotton, that's very much common, that's fastly improving, but the process often requires a very high percentage of a monomaterial. So say for instance something that is a 70-30 probably can't be recycled because the output of that would be much lower. So generally needs to be around 90-95, and often garments are blended, so that can present a challenge as well, where you need really a garment to weight towards one composition quite significantly more so than the others. Pre-consumer materials are the preferred feedstock more so than post-consumer materials, generally because they carry a greater risk, they're more time consuming to process and recycle. What I mean by that is that recycling companies prefer sort of like offcuts, like what you talked about, Jack, from maybe the production floor, more so than already worn and used garments, because it's, if you imagine, it's costly for them to sort of take it apart and then process it, whereas they can have they've sort of more confidence in something that's coming off the shop floor because they know exactly what it is. So that can be quite challenging as well. And if you imagine the volume of offcuts from the shop floor versus used garments, it's quite significant. As well as that then, in terms of textile recycling, so the infrastructure really for collecting, laundering and processing waste is still very much inadequate. What I tend to find quite a lot is there's a lot of businesses recycling, mechanically recycling or chemically recycling polyester, but there's very few that exist to actually collect it and disassembly it and process it before it eventually gets to that. So that again can present some challenges. And then again, the ones that are processing it, they're often selling off the pellets to another third party. So the sort of traceability of it or the supply chain of it is quite fragmented. There's no one person really that's doing it all, and that can be quite challenging then to sort of promise that traceability side of things. Then onto budgetary constraints. So tight budgets allocated for uniforms, particularly in the public sector, can limit the choice of fabrication that we use. Typically, as you would expect, sustainable fabrics cost a little bit more. So obviously they're working within tight budgets, and the fabrics that we might propose or we might be able to use, they simply just wouldn't be able to afford it. Additionally, on top of that then, the tender process, generally price is the main driver for that. So price can account from anything to 30-40% of the evaluation criteria, followed by the quality, and then sustainability generally is 10% or less. So it's not as big as a priority. What I will say though, the positive thing about that is we're seeing it increasing slowly, particularly with some of the European authorities where they're putting a bigger focus on it. So they're offering sort of like subsidies, or they're giving a higher percentage rate to it if you can stipulate a recycling process, and then if you can follow that through as well. So that's encouraging to see that shift towards it, but ultimately price remains the decider. Then in terms of limited legislation and guidance, we're all aware of the EU legislation that's pending. I suppose the question remains, will it really go far enough? Generally what is out there is very much focused on the fashion industry. There's not a huge amount that's specific to workwear, and there's definitely not a huge amount that's specific to defence. So that can be quite frustrating as well, because I don't necessarily think the same laws should apply, given the nature of the product, and it's hard to visualise how some of that legislation will actually work for the nature of some of those products. So that can be quite frustrating as well. Certainly the priority seems to be where funding is allocated more so to the fashion industry. There are bodies like the European Defence Agency. They're actively conducting a report at the minute to understand what DPP would look like for the defence. So they're investigating that. They're looking at the feasibility of data sharing schemes with a central focus on sort of data protection, because obviously, you know, there's a huge amount of information there that you wouldn't necessarily want to be openly shared. But that feels like something that is quite far off. So I suppose the risk there is that until there is more sort of stable legislation and guidance specific to these sort of, I would say, forgotten areas within the industry, you could argue that the industry will continue to drag its heels a little bit. Then looking at material availability and investment risks. I'm worried that this all sounds a little bit doom and gloom, but I promise there's some opportunities coming. But yeah, in terms of recycled fibres and materials, very much increasing in the market as brands are looking to sort of enhance their sustainability agenda. I think the access of recycled content is actually much more challenging than what you think. Polyester or PET polyester is widely available, but there is that sort of shift that is becoming less desirable as people start to realise that they don't want to wear plastic bottles, and that they want their clothing to be fibre to fibre, textile to textile. That is coming along. There are some brands out there that are using a combination of both. It's actually getting hold of the feedstock, the actual recycled content, that is really challenging for a lot of businesses, and to get hold of that in volume, and then the logistics behind the process and the cost of that, the time of that. So that is really what I think is stalling it. It's not that there's a shortage of textile waste, because we know there's plenty of that. Then in addition to that, innovative technologies, so the likes of biodegradable fibres, yarns, starting to see that a lot more on the market, but for a lot of them it's very much still at a pilot stage, and they're looking for partners to invest in that. So you'll see that quite often, that Inditex has, you know, invested 60 million in a certain fabric, and they're going to support it for X amount of years, and that's brilliant to see. But a lot of those brands are looking for that investment, because that's what's going to drive their innovation, and that's what's going to bring it to commercial use. And obviously for smaller businesses, there's an element of that there's risk in that as well, as to what extent you can invest in that. And then the last one then is skeptical and linear mindsets. So I'm including this because I think it's important to sort of say that, you know, in a business you'll not always meet people that share the same enthusiasm for sustainability as yourself. Some people will really quickly try to commercialise it. Some people will we'll just see it as like a tick box exercise. Some people will just see it as the biggest inconvenience of their job. And I think in general, the problem is that it can be very overwhelming. I don't think sustainability isn't referred to as a wicked problem because it's straightforward. It's so complex. There's so many sort of leverages to think about, and there's no sort of one size fits all. So I generally find that people just feel a little bit overwhelmed about it, and it can be quite difficult to have conversations as to how to implement some of these strategies because you just don't know where to start. So I just think that's quite important to sort of highlight there as well, that people don't often necessarily think the same way. Moving on then to something that is a little bit more positive in terms of opportunities. So obviously when you start to think about sustainability in workwear and defence, I think it's important to remember that nothing is sustainable unless it's going to consider the 4 divisions of what sustainability is. So that's economic, social, environmental, and then operational as well. You can focus on one more heavily than the other, but generally it'll only be sustainable if you consider all 4 of them. I've broken this then down into 3 phases. So if we think of a specific project, the inflow phase, the in-use phase, and the outflow phase. So starting with the inflow phase, that's really about the sourcing of the materials and the components, and there should be a maximum focus here on optimising resources, minimising waste, and promoting sustainable sourcing. Some ideas then that fall into that is obviously the materials, trying to use recycled, renewable, responsibly resourced materials, designing for circularity. This is quite a big one. Generally, we would design a product and then be thinking, how do we recycle this at the very end, when we need to be thinking about that at the very beginning. So the choice of material in terms of the composition, in terms of the design of it, how easy is it to disassemble, how easy is it to recover some of those materials or repair it or reuse it. Supply chain transparency then, so implementing systems for tracing the life cycle of materials, and then certification, which is really just an incredible way of demonstrating compliance and level of conformity. And Dave, I know you're going to talk about that a little bit as well later on. Then we have the in-use phase. So this is really about maximising the lifespan of the product when it's in use. Again, minimising resource consumption and promoting responsible use. So product longevity, designing products for durability and reliability to mitigate the damage and reduce the need for replacement. This could be about selecting quality materials, optimising the fabric construction to improve the tear strength, or reinforcing stitches and seams at certain stress points of the actual garment. And then maintaining and repairing, so promoting repairability, providing access to spare components and repair services to extend the life of a product to reduce premature disposal. And then finally, the outflow phase. This stage involves the end-of-life management, so including the disposal, the recycling, the recovery, with the aim to minimise waste and recover valuable materials to close the loop. So it's about, I suppose, really trying to find those partners that you can collaborate with that are going to help you sort of process a garment at the end of its life, and the idea is to obviously implement that back into the chain as well. And that's so easy to say but so difficult to do, and it really is about finding the right partners and trying to keep that sort of supply chain as tight as possible for the transparency of it. One advantage I would say in a business such as Canine, with our workwear, we obviously work directly with a customer. So we have, I suppose, the advantage in that when we supply uniforms, they can quite easily be gathered back into sort of one area and can quite easily be, I suppose, collected and sent for processing in sort of one bulk. That's obviously much more challenging when it comes to retail, and the responsibility of a retailer, you know, almost sort of stops at the point where they would be listing on a label as to what a customer should do. But obviously, you know, the retailer can't really control that. So I think that's one real sort of focus area for a workwear business, that there's a lot more opportunity there to sort of control the scope of garments once they have been used. And then finally, extender producer responsibility. So yeah, really taking responsibility then for the product throughout the life cycle. So not just supplying it and that being it and washing your hands of it, but actually saying, okay, once you've used it for X amount of years, we're going to take it back and this is what we're going to do. And then finally, just to touch on some sort of general system enablers that I think are really fundamental for the workwear and defence sector. I'll start with leadership. So essential for establishing strategy, direction, mandate for adopting sustainable practices, ensuring that it becomes a core aspect of business operations. So it's not really enough to sort of a few people just to be talking about it. It really needs to be coming from the top down, and actually the leadership like directing the responsibility and the accountability across the multiple functions to really drive this through, making sure that objectives are smart and they're in line with the business's mission and values. Education is probably a significant one, and that goes for employees and stakeholders as well. And it's really about trying to build knowledge to sort of foster an understanding and a genuine care for sustainability, which will help sort of buy people into the concept and make it part of business day-to-day life, as opposed to just this sort of add-on. And yeah, just really to build greater awareness about sort of the impact as well, because I think sometimes we can be so shut off with the reality of it that actually you don't bring it back to, you know, your own decisions and understand the impact of the decisions that you're making yourself. Then behavioural change, so overcoming inaction and disinterest, develop a culture of innovation, collaboration and continuous improvement. Effective communication, trust, transparency goes without saying, but it really empowers employees to make informed decisions and embrace new ways of thinking and working. And then collaboration, again with partners across the supply chain, really trying to establish robust systems that are essential for implementing circularity, and really trying to establish those reverse loops and connecting back to the original supply base as best as possible. And as I mentioned already, the sort of smaller that supply chain is, the more control and visibility you'll have over it. Data is a big one, and I suppose not really an area that I'm hugely knowledgeable in, but we hear a lot of talk about AI and the importance of how AI can influence and start to shape some of this work that needs to be done, so that it's not so sort of heavy man-powered or heavy reliant on people doing it. But essentially data standardization and analysis serves as a really powerful tool to help track and validate information that can be used to inform strategic decisions. And I've seen some really great examples of this, of some businesses already that have created a DPP service, Digital Product Passport, and you can see by just providing snippets of information about the product, how you can sort of start to build up and actually see the impact of it in terms of water usage, energy usage, transporting it from A to B, and you can very quickly start to see where improvements can be made. So that I think is going to be huge, because I suppose everybody likes when you can put a figure to something, or you can put a percentage to something. And then finally, investment, financial investment, fundamental for research and development. Not every idea that you'll have, or every proof of concept that's out there, will materialize into something commercial. But I think the lack of willingness to invest to some degree, depending on what it is that your business is and how much you can invest in that, is really important to sort of mitigate those risks. I think sometimes there can be a bit of a mindset where we're waiting for the government to say this, or for this to become law, when actually a lot of the work you sort of need to push on with it, and you need to be investing in it from your own business's perspective, to be able to then be ready for actually when it is going to be legal. So I think the investment, financial investment, but also time investment as well, is hugely important. Thank you very much. That's me.
Brilliant. Thank you.